Aldous Huxley was an English writer and philosopher. He wrote nearly 50 books. And here's his quote about history. That men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons of history. Welcome to the History Slices podcast, a mother-son duo discussing awesome bits of history. We prove on every show that history is not boring, entertaining, yet stimulating. This is History Slices. And now, here's your hosts, Jacob and Rachel.
Hi, Jacob.
Hey, Mom.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing well. I ask you that every time. Every time you're doing really great. So that's awesome.
Yeah. It's just a mask to hide my inner torment and suffering. No, thing is, there's not too much crazy stuff going on. Yeah. So in comparison, it's all good.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
And we're glad for that.
I still have all my limbs.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you're getting over being sick. I can still hear it a little bit.
A little bit, yeah, but that's fine. That happens.
Yeah, we're good to go. Okay, so topic for today.
Yes. If you remember from last time, we're going to be talking about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. It's very hilarious to me. A bit of, how do they say it? Schadenfreude, I think, that German term for like humor at the expense of other people.
Oh,
Leave
my
it to
goodness.
the Germans to have a word for that.
I didn't actually know that there was a word for that.
Oh, yeah. Well, basically, we're talking about end of the world predictions. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, Mom, but the world hasn't ended yet as of recording this, 2021.
Although we have felt like it could have a time or two, especially in last year.
Yeah, I think every generation, and there's a lot of these, we're not going to talk about all of them because good Lord, but every generation has had that feeling where like, oh, this could be it, you know?
You know, I remember when I was, I think it was in late junior high, early high school, there was a rumor going around that somebody had predicted that the world was going to end. And like it was going to end at midnight that night. I just remember just this odd feeling like everybody seemed to know about this rumor and maybe it was going to be true. You know, it was just the weirdest feeling. That was my first knowledge of this type of thing.
Yeah. Throughout history, there's been so many different people in a variety of cultures and faiths and like all over the place that have predicted the world. And it raises the question of why this is such a reoccurring thing that people do. There's been a couple like theories that have been put forward as to why
this keeps happening.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it isn't one particular thing. It's probably several things. And when you look at like some of the examples that we're going to cover today, you know, you could see this. Sometimes people are pushing an agenda, like they're scapegoating a particular group of people, or they're trying to keep the masses' attention off something else going on, you know, like I'm not saying that governments do this, but like some authority figures will sometimes be like, look, all this terrible stuff is happening because group X or whatever, you know, and it kind of keeps, I don't know if it's still applicable to today times, but at least in a historical context, it kind of kept a lot of the groups or the masses' attention off of like other problems going on or whatever.
So related to, because I can see all these things are happening and we're blaming group X for it just in politics and society, but it actually got to the point where groups were being blamed for these end of the world, like the end of the world is coming and it's because of group X.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, like back in medieval times, a lot of like French predictions for like end of the world blame the British.
Okay.
And a lot of Christian predictions for end of the world, again, back in medieval times, blame the Jews. Like, you know, there's this like old rivalries or old like groups that did not get along. And whenever like these type of thought would come up, it'd be like, well, it's obviously going to be their fault.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But a different reason why some people do this is psychological, right?
Like on a more personal level.
Yeah, on a more mental level, I guess. Well, because sometimes people, I'm not saying that everyone does this always, but sometimes people will, with a lot of separate individual problems, will mentally combine them and make one giant problem because it's easier to comprehend
and handle in a way,
or at least give the appearance of being able to handle. you
I
know,
think Dad would call that spiraling.
maybe, yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding. I'm just trying to wrap my head around a scenario where there's a lot of little problems and kind of put it all in one bucket. So it's like, okay, this is okay.
It's less into the world stuff, but I do know that a lot of, what's the polite way of saying this? Fanatical people will sometimes group a lot of different things that they don't like into one thing, even if that doesn't really make sense.
Okay.
Because they're like, you know, an example of this, again, it's not really, it's a little separate from what we're talking about, but do you know who Zach Sick is or was? He was he made a lot of little, call them tracks. They're like little comics. And basically he railed against Catholics, against homosexuals, against people who played role-playing games, against Muslims, like a whole bunch of people that he had a problem with. And he grouped them all together as one big satanic conspiracy thing going on. They're really fun to read, but you know, but it's kind of like that delusion of like
sort of associating things that don't belong together.
Yeah.
Just I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's one reason people do this. Also, some people have just suffer from paranoia, you know, like they just have like some mental issues with that. There is I believe at least an innate human fascination with being scared. You know, that's why horror movies and related stories are so popular. You know, it gets that
it's an adrenaline
kick or whatever. Yeah. Or adrenaline, you know, it's just, you know,
it's a bit of a rush.
It is the brain a little. Yeah. I'm sure it's not like a major reason, but it probably doesn't help. And also
at least fuels the fascination for like somebody proclaiming into the world and people get excited about it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And also, at least more recently, pop culture romanticizes a lot of, you know, post-apocalyptic stuff, you know, like the Fallout games, I Am Legend, The Walking Dead, which is very popular, you know, society's collapsed, you know, that type of stories are pretty common and they've been common for a while. Like I don't know if you remember this, it's a little more your generation, I think, Stephen King's book, The Stand.
Oh, yes, I actually read that.
Yeah, like that's basically
after the end of the world.
Sorry, it's a predecessor to things like The Walking Dead or whatever, you know.
Yeah, very interesting. You're right. There's just so much. I wonder if what you're describing is the same as like dystopian novels like The Hunger Games and
there's overlap, I think. A lot of, not that I've read a lot, but from my understanding, a lot of dystopian works, the dystopian question exists because society has undergone a major change or collapse or whatever.
Yeah.
There is the Bible stance on trying to predict the world is very interesting to me. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because obviously not everyone who's predicting the world is religious, or other people who are religious, not all of them are Christian. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because some of the ones we're going to look at are Christian, or at least identify as such.
Okay.
But it's interesting to me. Matthew 24:36 states that no one can know when the end of the world's coming. Like not even angels know. Like that's a strict confidentiality thing.
It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear in the Bible. Yeah.
And you'll see that a lot where like, we're going to get a little more into it later on when we start talking about Harold Camping. But I have things to say about that guy. But it bothers me that a lot of non-religious people, when they look at religion, see these kind of out there people saying all this crazy stuff and they think, oh, they're all like that. And I'm like, no. Whenever like something like this happens, at least in the more modern times, maybe not so much medieval times, but more modern times, most religions, major religions, distance themselves from that. They're like, no, we're not saying that. It's this guy saying that stuff.
Yeah. That can go for so many things though, honestly.
It's true,
like stereotyping anything, you know, all hunters think X or you know, all whatever.
Yeah, all Americans are like this.
Yeah, there's just a danger in doing that.
All Gen Xers are like this.
Exactly.
You know, whatever.
You just have to be super careful because we're all individuals, obviously, with individual thoughts, hopefully.
Yeah. And like shared culture and beliefs is definitely a thing, but even then there's so many different subcategories and people just being their own person that despite identifying with one thing or another.
Right. Or several things. It's
always several things. Yeah. But it's is real fascinating to me, but it's also like frustrating because I'm like, see, this doesn't paint a group of people in a positive light, and I know that's inaccurate, you know? So it's just like,
It is. It really is frustrating.
So, like I said, I'm not going to talk about predictions because some predictions have been made like 100 years ago or whatever that, you know, or the year 30,000 or whatever, you know, some predictions in the past, that date has yet to come up.
Okay.
I'm not going to talk about those because that's future stuff. And this is a history podcast.
Right. And the title of this episode is Failed.
Yeah, we don't know. Maybe they're right. Probably not, but you don't know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a timeline of different people having this idea and kind of publicizing it, I guess is the right word for it.
Sure, announcing it publicly.
Yeah, as opposed to just keeping it to themselves. So one thing is I was having trouble finding a good source for this. So maybe take this with more of a grain of salt. But from some of the stuff I've read and some of my research, there's this idea that some early Christians, like Jesus' disciples and stuff, had the idea that Christ would return within their lifetime. I think there's something like biblical. I'm not an expert, but I think there's something biblical about like you won't taste death or something like that until, you know, something that's very easy to interpret different ways. And obviously that didn't happen as far as we know. But yeah, so that's kind of like an early one I was looking at. Later on, like into more of a medieval times, you know, like after the whole Rome's powerhouse thing going on, the year 1000, it's a real sexy number, you know. It sounds cool.
It's like the number 10 but on steroids. Yeah,
well, it's like if you read old science fiction comics or stories from like the 1950s, the year 2000 is like, oh, that's so crazy. It's going to have like spaceships and Jetsons. And when you got to actual year 2000, it's just kind of bland with some like poorly made music videos. It's like, okay.
And what was that? 2YK.
Yeah, that was another one. We could talk about that later.
Okay.
So year 1000, also people thought that, well, if year 0, which isn't really on the calendar, but if year 0 is the birth of Christ, this would be 1,000 years after Christ. Again, sexy number. It's a round number. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Nowadays, a lot of historians and people who study this stuff for a living and aren't amateurs like me think that the year count might actually be off by like a few years or so. So even then, it probably wasn't actually like the anniversary.
Yeah. It just doesn't sound, it's not as catchy to say the end of the world's going to be 1003.
Yeah.
As far as the year 1000.
Yeah. So a few decades later, 1033 or 1033, I'm not sure how you say that. A lot of Christians were like, okay, well, if it's not 1,000 years after the birth of Christ, maybe it's 1,000 years after the death of Christ. And traditionally, I don't know how much evidence from like a theological or historical sense this is, but traditionally 33 AD is like the year given for like the crucifixion and all that. Anyways, so they thought, oh, 1033, this is going to be it. It wasn't. You're going to hear us a lot. It wasn't. So time passed on. Pope Innocent III. First of all, a side note, there's been so many popes that some of them are kind of notorious for being really wacky. But this guy, to give an example, I don't remember the exact names of them, but one pope dug up the corpse of another pope to put on trial because he had beef with him. And it was just like, it basically ruined his reputation because people were like, this is weird. It was like,
so strange.
There's been some wacky popes. The one pope that was a Borgia, I think, was just like, he just had orgies and stuff in his, in the chapels that he got. Basically, I don't know if he got booted out, but people were like, really not okay.
Isn't that crazy? That's just really crazy.
Yeah.
What did they say? He was what?
A Borgia. It was like a rich Italian family from like the Renaissance.
Oh, okay.
Very influential.
Okay, all right. I wasn't familiar with that name.
I can't remember the names of it because I wasn't looking at that, but whatever.
Yeah.
Pope Innocent III. So he made a claim that the world would end 666 years after the rise of Islam. Obviously, number of the beast there, which again, a lot of theologians nowadays are of the opinion that that was more of a reference to Nero, who was emperor, I believe at the time Revelation was written or around that time. And he was notoriously anti-Christian, throw them to the lions, that stuff. And on his coins and stuff was that the 666 because he was like what was it? Like that was his number of like the lineage or whatever it was. But it was just like, there's been some debate as to like how unholy of a number, quote unquote, that number is compared to how it's just been kind of a zab at the time enemy number uno of Christianity.
Yeah.
You know, it's a whole nother theme.
Yeah, that's all by itself would be an interesting study to look into the.
Yeah. Also, the Islam theme in this is interesting because I believe this was at the time when a lot of Christians had a misconception about Islam and Muhammad and were of the belief. You see this in the Divine Comedy by Dante. They're of the belief that Islam was like split off from Christianity, like it was like a splinter theme, when in reality it was more of a, I'm not sure how you call it, like it came up on its own, basically. It wasn't like an engineered thing or anything like that. Regardless, that would have, according to Pope Innocent III's idea, that would basically put the end of the world around 1284 or so.
Okay, around 1284. Okay.
Yeah. So I just thought it was interesting that a pope had a prediction.
Especially
like
since the Bible says
yeah. Well, that's the thing.
that
with, like,
nobody knows the date.
Yeah, that's the thing with a lot of these. I'm like, what about Matthew? Whatever, 24, whatever it was. You know, I really forgot.
And so that just like for people in leadership in a religion that bases their belief on the Bible, that's really interesting.
Yeah. I'm trying to think when the Reformation was. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I know that with the printing press, which I believe was after this.
I think for sure it was after 12 something.
Yeah. The printing press made the Bible a lot more accessible to a lot more people. And before it was just kind of like, well, either you spoke Latin and had to be trained to speak Latin or whatever, and were a priest, you know, like if you're just like one of the masses, you had to kind of go off what they said and just took that at face value.
Trust what they say.
Yeah. So there's also might be some of that stuff going ahead of it. These are all quick examples because there's a lot and I had to trim down just tremendously.
Yeah.
So Christopher Columbus, maybe you remember him. We talked about him a little bit.
Who doesn't know Christopher Columbus in the United States? Yeah.
I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I'll try to quell my raging heart against him.
Yeah.
So anyways, he wrote a book called, and it has a, I believe, Spanish title. So I'll make an attempt to pronounce it. It's in English, it's a book of prophecies. It's El Libro de las Profecias. Is that correct?
That's not bad. El Libro de las Profecias.
Yeah.
Or Profecias. I'm not sure depending on where the accent is.
Yeah. Well, book of prophecies, basically. And what it was is, it wasn't really so much it wasn't like Nostradamus where he wrote like a bunch of stuff. It was more like, this is me being Christopher Columbus, reading the book of Revelation and thinking I know what's up. And let me explain why. World's going to end 1656, first of all. Mark it down. He wrote this book. I can't remember all of his rationales for it, but he wrote this book near the end of his life, like after the whole New World excursion stuff. And when we were doing that episode, I had no idea this thing was a thing.
Isn't that fascinating?
You'll learn something new every day. Yeah. Next example we're going to go into, one of my favorites. Her name is Mary Bateman. She was English ne'er-do-well, I suppose. She got accused of being a witch. She watched like poisoned some people with a pudding. It was like a lot of crazy stuff associated with this girl. She lived from 1768 to 1809. She was a former servant girl, so she knew how to read and write and stuff, which wasn't as common among women at the time. What she's well known for, I think, at least in terms of this stuff, is in 1806, she made a hoax about a hen.
Now, didn't you say, did she die in 1806 or 1809?
1809.
Oh, okay. So it's just a little bit before. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. So she made a hoax about a hen.
Yes. A female chicken. This is actually called the Prophet Hen of Leeds because that's where she was at the time. But so this is what happened. So this chicken kept laying these eggs with the words written on them saying Christ is coming.
More than one egg?
Yeah.
Like it kept laying them.
Yeah. And people would come around and they'd watch and the chicken would lay the egg and there it is. Like they, it wasn't like, oh, look at this egg. It was like they laid it with that on. Well, they realized quickly what was going on. It's a bit gross, but she had written the words on the egg and then just kind of pushed it into the chicken.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that like an hour or two or whenever like people had gathered around, it would all be set up.
Oh wow.
I don't know why she was
Sounds
doing
like
this.
animal abuse.
I would agree. Yes, I don't know why she was doing this.
How odd.
Yeah.
I guess that's what happens when you don't have television to entertain you.
Yes, yeah. I see. Might have been like a Tinson. She's known for like a bust. She robbed some people, scammed some people. Apparently, and this is a real nasty thing she did. There was a major fire. In the aftermath of that fire, she would go around asking for money for the victims of the fire, and then just keep the money.
Wow,
So
just a scoundrel.
Yeah, she was just a scoundrel.
No,
and,
what did the egg say? What did she write?
Christ is coming.
Okay.
And also, people have claimed, I couldn't find anything that like C claimed this, but maybe C did, that C provided abortions to women and stuff.
She's busy in her few decades
so
of
that's
life.
fun. Like she's just doing like a bunch of crazy stuff. All right, so the next one is another woman named Joanna Southcott. She was a prophet, self-titled. This makes you think she was like a cult leader, but whatever. She claimed to her followers that she was pregnant with the child of Jesus. This is a bit suspect if you know like anything about religion.
That's quite a claim.
It is, yeah. She had some followers, like some of them not like known to us, but were known at the time. Like they have articles on Wikipedia, you know, like they had names.
Wow.
Anyways, she said that her child, Jesus's kid, would be born October 19th, 1814. And that would begin kind of the end times. It'll begin heralding like into the world stuff. Keep in mind, she was 64 at the time. So it was an older woman. And she passed away before she could give birth.
Wow.
When they performed an autopsy on her, they found out she wasn't pregnant at all. So yeah, that was a lie then.
Wow. What a mixed up.
I know, right?
I'm not even sure where to start with the mixed up part of that. Like, I was thinking, okay, she's pregnant. So what does she do with the guy, the dad? Yeah. Okay, so there wasn't really a dad, and then she was 64. So I was thinking, well, really, you know, but there's just so many different directions.
It's a crazy story.
Yeah, it is a crazy story.
Yeah.
How interesting that she died though before the
she was older, but yeah.
Yeah, but still. Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things that like I can't imagine.
And she was convincing enough for people to believe.
Yeah, I mean, I can't get it that like at the time people are more religious and more willing to be into that, but at the same time I'm like, yeah, but there's also logic. Like being religious doesn't mean you're not a rational person. So that was Joanna. Finally, there was what's called the Great Disappointment. and you know it's going to be good with a name like that.
Yeah.
So there was this Baptist preacher by the name of William Miller. He had started a movement, like the Millerite movement, I think it's called. And he began making announcements. How he came to this is the same reason a couple of these people came to it, is that he just obsessed over like Revelation and, certain passages in scripture, and started connecting dots that probably weren't there or weren't meant to be connected in that way. Regardless, he got some more followers and he announced that Jesus Christ would return to earth in 1844, or by that year at least. And again, enough people kind of bought it up, not as much as Joanna, which we just talked about. I think her group was a lot smaller, but there's enough people that were like, oh, that makes sense. You know, I think it helped that he was already a preacher, and
right?
He probably had some clout already.
Yeah.
So
gosh,
that didn't happen, obviously. But he was still alive when his date came. Some of these people died before their predictions, like that Pope I mentioned.
Yeah.
He was
Columbus.
dead by the time that date came around.
So they never got to see whether or not it was true.
Yeah. This guy did. And he's like, okay, my math was off basically. So, this was a test of faith. So it's actually he moved the date up, it's actually gonna happen this date. And it didn't happen either. And eventually, he had to admit that he was wrong. And it's called the Great Disappointment because a lot of people were bummed out because they were hoping for the rapture to happen and Revelation and all that stuff and enter the kingdom of heaven or whatever.
Yeah.
I get the feeling that some of these people are just want to experience that, and can't stand the thought of not being in that time.
That's interesting. That's interesting. That could be one thing.
Mm-hmm.
There might also be people who just really like to know what's going to happen. Like,
there's that.
If you believe that it's going to happen at a certain time, that feels like, well, that's not an uncertain thing anymore.
Yeah.
So I know what's going to happen. I can plan my life around this.
And that's where the problem comes in, where people start to plan their life around this thing that isn't going to happen. It ends up messing them up.
Yeah.
And I honestly believe Miller thought it was going to be. He wasn't asking for money. It wasn't like a scam thing like some of these I think are.
He seemed genuine.
And he like had made statements about like himself being disappointed and being like, I guess I don't really know.
Yeah. So he was apologetic afterwards.
Yeah.
He owned up to it.
So moving on to more of a modern era, Halleys Comet. It's passed by the Earth a couple times.
Like every 70 years or something like that?
Something like that. In 1910, it was found out that it would be passing very close to the Earth. And like, I think its tail would end up, Earth would pass its tail or something along those lines. And some newspapers, no doubt trying to sell papers, they made a claim that like it'll have negative effects and be poisonous to breathe. And a lot of people started to buy gas masks, anti-comet pills, which I don't know what, anti-comet umbrellas, which seems even more practical. Like just, people start freaking out about it. And then enterprising people are like, oh, I can sell stuff off this, turn a profit. It was a big hullabaloo. The comet passed, and I think we did pass through its tail, but there wasn't any negative side effects, at least not that we could tell. So
I'm trying to picture what a comet-proof umbrella looks like or something like that.
I don't know. It's just sounds like someone doesn't know what a comet is, honestly.
Yeah, and just as an aside, there's times like that in history where, gosh, something terrible is going to happen. So we try to prepare. Like the end of there's this coming, so we have to try to prepare. So we're going to buy gas masks and umbrellas or bomb shelters or whatever. It's like, I think when it comes, it's like, I don't think we're going to be able to avoid it,
Yeah. I mean, it's nice to try to be prepared.
Yeah. Self-preservation is a thing.
Well, like I'm thinking of recently been through a historic ice storm, I think it's called. And we weren't very prepared at all.
We
could have had some more like cans or whatever stocked up. I don't know, something. But we didn't really. Luckily, we managed to get through it pretty much unscathed. But
just a little sort of discomfort.
Yeah. But I think there's definitely something to be said about trying to be prepared. But it's also like after a certain point, it's like, well, what are you gonna do? It's tricky.
Yeah. Good point.
There's another example, slightly more reasonable than some of the other ones. When during the Second World War, when they were at the Trinity test site, and testing this new super weapon, the atomic bomb, there was fear from some of the scientists and people working there that they might accidentally ignite the atmosphere, which granted would have ended the war. But
wow.
Yeah.
That is a real fear.
Yeah. Luckily it didn't happen, but it was a concern that was like lodged like, hey, hold on. We might be causing Armageddon here. Make sure you don't do that.
Can you imagine working on a team like that where it's like, okay, if we open this can of worms, we could completely destroy a planet. That must have been terrifying.
Oh yeah. Well, J. Robert Oppenheimer, one of the lead people working on it, when they first tested it, he is quoted as saying, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds," which is an older quote from like a Hindu text, but it's basically like the idea that the cat's out of the bag now.
Right.
We built it. We're not going to just forget that this happened. People are going to use it as sort of enough during the Cold War later on. That was a big concern between like these two superpowers. They both have a stockpile of these things. They're both becoming way more devastating. And now third parties, other countries are getting them. And like the idea was, this is jumping ahead a bit, but the idea was that like, we trusted the Soviets to not blow up the world because we thought, well, they're smart enough not to do that. But North Korea, wherever, some other country, they might actually use it.
There's no getting that cat back in the bag once it's out. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a real fascinating turning point in history. But that specific thing I want to talk about because that was I guess not really a prediction so much as a concern, but it was when I thought like, oh, that actually does kind of make
it's
sense.
more
for the
legitimate.
time. Yeah. I thought that was interesting. So I'm going to head to my lifetime or near my lifetime. Have you heard of Heaven's Gate?
It sounds familiar to me. Was it a cult?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they were a doomsday cult. I think they weren't that well known until...
Were they like in the 70s or 80s?
In the 90s.
In the 90s. Oh, okay. More recent.
They committed mass suicide.
Oh.
And that's kind of what put them in the news.
Were they an American?
Oh, okay. Yeah, they were in America. They were like in Texas or whatever.
Was this the Waco, Texas thing?
No. That's a different cult.
Okay. I couldn't remember what the name of that cult was. All I remember is Waco and David somebody.
Yeah. Well, basically there was 39 members in this group. They were pretty friends. They all had shaved heads and dressed identical and stuff. It was kind of combining Christian symbology and iconology and stuff, like Messiah and Second Coming and that stuff. And it was also combining like UFO things, like space aids, whatever. It was very strange. The guy who founded it was named Barcelo Applewhite. I can't remember if that was his birthday or not, but he was an odd bird. He fancied himself the Messiah. He founded it with his wife, and when he got cancer and passed away, he had to like explain that basically because they're supposed to be space Jesuses and he can't do that. It's like it's a very fascinating subject. It's very weird and it's very sad what happened.
It really is. It's things like that. I want to believe that the guy was not just trying to, be weird and out there to gain followers to kill them. Like
Well, he committed suicide with them.
Well, that's what I'm saying is I think that these people, the cult leaders, I would hope. I mean, strange thing to hope, but just what I'm saying is that it's coming from a place of mental illness and not outright intent to harm.
Yeah.
It doesn't make the outcome any better.
I think this was just a case of a guy who had some mental issues, and I don't know if he's charismatic or what, but he managed to get a small following.
Yeah, some people are seeking something.
Mm-hmm. So what happened was in the 90s, I can't remember the exact year, Halleys the Comet, it passed by. So a couple of comets in this episode, but they got it into their heads that the spaceship that was going to take them all up to heaven or whatever was hiding behind the comet, and Earth was about to be recycled, which is a polite term to say destroyed. But and so they're like, oh, okay, we'll off ourselves basically, and we'll go up into the spaceship. And it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Wow.
But it was interesting. They actually filmed a video beforehand saying goodbye and being
gosh.
It's a really fascinating story. Yeah, it was weird. Before we move on, one last thing that was kind of funny, how that cult made their money and kind of were sufficient.
Yeah.
A lot of them were into web design.
You're kidding.
And I'm not. Like, they just design websites. And in fact, the Heaven's Gate official website is still up and running to this day.
No kidding.
Yeah, I don't know who's paying for it, if it's just on a computer that's been left on or what, I don't know how that.
Or it's out there in the web. So nobody took it down, or somebody's got to be hosting that.
Yeah.
How?
But it's still up.
How bizarre.
There's a lot of websites that are like that are just abandoned.
So I'm just kind of reflecting on what, I hear what you said about abandoned websites. That's true. It's like it's like cyber garbage.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. But just trying to wrap my head around people who work on websites. I mean, I can see kind of the connection to space, aliens or whatever, because that seems more, I don't know, technology and space kind of go more together. But when you asked how they make their money, I was thinking, like pot. I mean, something that you would grow that was
psychedelic thing.
It's something, it's something that would be natural or whatever. But
no.
that hit me out of left field.
Yeah, no, they were strange butts. It was really interesting though. So this is another kind of more lighthearted example. It's kind of funny. June 6, 2006. Number of the Beast again. It's pretty silly. Like, I think that's just
that's really like
throwing something out there.
06.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, let's see what sticks. Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, like, kind of the, not creme de la creme, but like the more recent one that was a big deal that made news, Harold Camping. Do you know who? Have you heard of him?
I've heard you mention Harold Camping before.
Yes, I've definitely talked about it before. So he was the CEO and founder of Family Radio, which in its time was like the biggest or one of the biggest Christian media empire things. They had a lot of radio stations. He had like a show where he could sit there, talk about scripture and stuff. It was a radio network. I'm not sure if it was televised. I think it was just a radio network, but it was very popular. It got like millions of people tuning into it. It was founded in 1959. I think it's still around, though. It's a bit different now because of this. There's like 3 founders, and the other 2 got too old to stop camping from saying crazy stuff. Because he was an older guy at this point. This was 2011, in case I didn't mention that.
Okay, so it started in 59, and he was one of the founders.
Yeah.
And in 2011...
he made this prediction. He said, it was a very suspect math. It was very complicated. I'm not going to repeat it.
Yeah.
But basically, he was adding up a lot of numbers that he found in the Bible.
Till they came out to be whatever he wanted it to be.
Yeah. He claimed that the Rapture was coming May 21st, 2011 at 6 p.m.
Wow, very specific.
And it would be by time zone. So that like so basically Rapture had happened. We'd all go whoop, up to space, heaven. Not that many, like a couple thousand people. And then tidal waves would happen and it would wreck the earth going by time zone at 6.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, it was crazy.
Wow.
It was crazy. And keep in mind, not the first time he predicted the end of the world either.
Really?
Really. In September 6, 1994, he made a similar claim, but for whatever reason, that wasn't...
His math was wrong.
Well, yeah, it didn't happen, obviously, but it wasn't like, I guess, enough to financially ruin him. What happened
because
was...
somehow he was able to keep going.
What happened was, and the reason why this was... reason why I think he believed this, like Miller, was that he bought thousands of billboards across the country saying this stuff. He sold off radio stations to make money to spread the word. He had buses of volunteers, the people who bought into it, to go around, put up flyers.
Was this the 94 one or the 2011
2011
one? Okay. So he like invested, he invested a lot of money in making sure people knew about it.
Yes, and Family Radio got most of its money from donations. They had other income sources, but a lot of it was donations. Not so much after this.
Yeah.
A lot of people who bought into this started maxing out their credit cards, started selling all their stuff, started like there's one family, I don't remember what that name, but there's one family, might have been like Ramsey, I can't remember. They basically pulled their kids out of school and went on a road trip to sightsee all of like the locations in America because they thought they wouldn't get a chance to afterwards. So much money wasted on that, by the way.
Life-changing decisions being made.
Because they thought like, well, it won't matter because in a few months we're not going to be here, so who cares? People were straight up all their retirement money. It was a nightmare. And
there must be still, that was 2011. This is 10 years later. There might still be people who are recovering from that prediction.
I'm sure, yeah. The news agency, like mainstream media news, caught wind of it because it was this massive campaign to get this word out. And they started talking about it, not in a serious, like, the end is nigh thing, but more of just say, this is funny. Let's talk about this. A lot of, not just atheists or agnostics, but a lot of other Christians and religious people were like, no, that's not how that works. They had a real beef with him. And it was so shocking. When the day rolled around, he stayed home. He didn't come out because he was like in quiet contemplation, waiting for 6 o'clock. The next day, he didn't sew up for his sew. He was fine, but physically, but he was really, his words were bewildered. I think a lot of people were really disappointed and really upset and felt betrayed by it. By the time he came back onto his sew, he had a new prediction.
Oh my goodness.
For like October 2011 or so. And at that point, a lot of people were fed up with him. His sew was, it's interesting because like there's recordings of in this in-between period where like he's on his show taking calls and people are like, upset at him. And like, if I was there, I'd slap you, or I spent so much money on, and eventually he had to admit that like he was wrong. No one can know the time or day. He said, I'm a sinner. I've sinned. I made a mistake.
Wow. Now, if he was very sincere and that's what he thought, and he missed that scripture that says nobody can know that, so he went ahead and perpetuated this idea and broadcasted, and I don't want to say recruited, but spread the word.
Recruited is a good word for it.
So he completely believed this. Can you imagine how odd that would feel at 7:00? When nothing happened, it'd be like, I don't know, like you almost feel like your insides would just cave in just from the anticipation and letdown.
One of his followers, I can't remember his name, it was something Patrick or whatever. He was like a retiree, former government employee guy. He was so confident that this would happen. And there's footage of this online. You got footage of this. He went down to Times Square because he lived in New York, and in front of a crowd of people just to show them that, look, it's going to happen. And of course it didn't. And it's funny, one, but it's also very heartbreaking because he could tell he is just so bewildered and confused. And the people are very unforgiving. Like their kinds just making fun of him. At one point, someone gave him like the bunny ears. And I'm like, that's just mean.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Harold Camping, he passed away 2013. I think fell down some stairs or something like that. He was an older guy. Yeah, it was just a crazy thing. The one thing that is definitely a remnant of that and still around, there is a business, I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically, if you believe you're going to be raptured, we'll look after your pets for you. That was one of the things that started at the time. And they're still around. So I'm like, hey,
that's
making
crazy.
money, I guess. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's really nuts.
Yeah.
Well, that's capitalism for you.
I guess. I'm like, hey, so long as no one's getting hurt, I guess.
Yeah.
The last one we're going to talk about real briefly, and then we're going to wrap up. 2012. It's crazy. A year later, I don't think there's any connection, but like, it's pretty funny. I remember when this was a thing. I don't remember camping. I remember 2012. And that's why I want it on there, because I'm like, well, if I remember it, it's not really history at that point. That's a little too recent. There was a lot of talk and speculation and internet memes. There's internet memes with camping too, but there's memes here where like the world was going to end in 2012. I don't know really where it came from. I believe the commonly held thought is that the Mayan calendar reset in 2012, which is reset in the past. That's like not a new thing. And it wasn't that they thought the world would end then. That's just when their calendar ended. It did. They started next,
Yeah.
Because of the way their calendar worked. So that there is just suspect.
Yeah. That was a pretty big thing. I do remember hearing quite a bit for some time about.
I was pretty disappointed. Well, not because I expected anything to happen, but I thought, hey, I'm pretty bored. I was in high school at the time, and I was
your favorite place to be,
right? And I remember because I was. This is like where I was at the time. It was early in the morning, like still dark out. And I was waiting outside for my drama class to open because it had doors to the outside because it was drama class and it had to be different. Anyways. And I'm like, yeah, nothing happened. I got bored. And I was like, no, I thought I saw a UFO. Pretty sure it was a plane. So yeah, it's like, no, nothing happened. Yeah, it was just kind of a funny, some overexcited people jumped on it, which I think is true for a lot of these things. Yeah. I'm not sure why I picked this topic other than it's very amusing and interesting to me. And I don't know. I just thought it would be a fun thing to chat about.
Yeah, I think it is. Now, I know you only touched on some of them, but do you know how many? Like,
hundreds.
Hundreds. I had no idea there were hundreds of end of the world predictions.
Yeah. And some of them are a little tricky because, like I talked about with camping and Miller, when the first one did come true, they made a new one. So it's like, do you count that as just two? Do you count it as one?
Yeah, because it's one guy.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned at the beginning something about Y2K, the year 2000.
Oh, yes. I forgot to talk about that.
No, that's okay. Because I don't know if we have time or not, but that was a big one. And it was just based on the fact that the computers weren't prepared to take in.
Yeah. A lot of people were concerned that like the year 2000, because it's been 19 or 18 or, you know, like
19.
not even 18. Yeah. 19XX for so long. And that's kind of how they were made. That they thought that like there was worry that the 20 in front of it would mess up everything and it would cause civilization to collapse or whatever.
Yeah. Systems would break down.
Yeah. If there was any issues, because I was like 4 when that happened. It wasn't enough to cause a problem.
Yeah.
Like it was just.
But there were a lot of people who were buying, you know, stocking up on food.
Yeah.
I mean, reasonable people who were, you know, afraid that we wouldn't be able to go buy food, and it was odd.
Yeah. Well, it's like a similar thing in my memory kind of happens when the government would shut down for like a week or whatever, a few days. And there's usually, you hear at least like one story of someone it's like tried to, you know, stock up on cans or, you know, it's like, I don't think that's how that works, but okay, sure. You know, they're concerned. I can't be too like up on them for being a concerned citizen.
Yeah. Also, as we covered earlier, it is good to be prepared.
It is.
You know, if you live in
somewhere
somewhere where there's ice storms or hurricanes or tornadoes, you got to have some, you got to watch out for yourself.
Yeah. It's just on the off chance.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's funny to me. It's interesting to me. And like because I have a great interest in psychology, as you know this about me. It's just interesting to me, you know.
I think it's really fascinating too, and you did a great job telling the story of.
It's really nice of you to say.
I'm glad we're still here.
Yeah, that's true. You know what? Yeah, if there is a happy note to end on this, despite all those poor people who ended up losing all their money and stuff, but doing like, you know, camping's thing. Debacle. That's a good word for it. It's currently 2021. We're still here. We're all good. World hasn't ended yet. So, hey, I drink to that.
Yeah, that's right. And that means that we're probably going to be here next week.
Probably.
So what is the next episode?
Smooth. I like it. So next episode, I'm glad you brought us up. It's a little different. We're going to have a guest over.
Oh.
Yeah. He wanted to.
Right.
He was loving our podcast and wanted to sit in for an episode. So that's going to be real fun. So it's going to be me and my uncle, your brother, David. And we're going to be talking about Ernest Hemingway, who's like one of the most interesting people in history.
Yeah, that's very cool. I'm looking forward to that like crazy. Listeners, we're so glad that you're able to join us for this failed end of the world predictions episode, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Confucius once said, "Study the past if you would define the future." You've been listening to the History Slices podcast with Jacob and Rachel. We hope you've gotten some useful information from the show. We hope we made you think, and we hope you were entertained. We know we had fun, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on Facebook at History Slices and on Instagram at History Slices Podcast. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show, and tell a friend about the show. That'll help us out too. One more quote before we go from Michael Crichton. If you don't know history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree. Till next time, this is History Slices, signing off.